Hey guys, good morning. So today I want to watch some video on the topic I was reacting to recently. So I've chosen the topic of Britain colonized India, and yeah, the previous video was pretty funny. It was like a stand-up and I was enjoying it a lot, but this one I'm sure it will be full of historical facts, and yeah, it will be about how Britain colonized India and impoverished it. And to be honest, I had no idea about the word impoverished, what it means. So I googled it. It means to make something poor. So it will be extremely long video, around 16 minutes. So I'll try to react during the video, maybe yeah, to say something during the video, but I'm sure the narrator, she or he, will be just talking non-stop, so I will try to stop the video and to say something quickly, so yeah, I guess yeah, it will be full of historical facts, not a funny video at all, so we'll see. And 16 minutes video, okay, what a challenge. I also prepared my translator on my laptop here, so in case there will be some words I will not understand, like impoverished, and to get a better idea of the video. Yeah, also I improved the quality of the video on my phone, so tell me guys in the comments if it improved on your devices, like how, when were you watching it. So yeah, it will be also nice for me to know, so let's watch it. I always forget to turn on the recording, so during the video I'll have to check if I'm recording it okay because I don't know why it's always a problem for me. So okay, I turned on the subtitles to understand it better.
Less than 3%, and it's
Wait.
In the year 1700, India's share in the world's economy was an astounding 27%, more than all of Europe combined.
Wow.
250 years later, India's share had dropped to less than 3%, and its people were left impoverished. What happened? Strap in, adventurers. We're about to dive into a dark and messy history. Welcome to 18th century India. In 1707 CE, the death of Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb sends the empire into a decades-long spiral. In his wake, an endless parade of weak princelings forced themselves upon the peacock throne. With the Mughal Empire teetering on the brink of collapse, regional powers jostled for supremacy. Land grabs and title claims, infighting and betrayal. India is vulnerable. The situation is so precarious that in 1739, Persian Emperor Nadir Shah invades North India and sacks Delhi. During this period of disorder, the British sensed opportunity. Leveraging their unique advantages as a foreign power, they bribed and blasted their way into a dominant position in the subcontinent. India was no stranger to dealing with foreign aggression. But
I was wondering, like, why India even had such attack, like why India was colonized, and yeah, now I see that it was so vulnerable because of many attacks, because of many colonizations and everything, that at that time, yeah, Britain had like saw an opportunity to also invade India.
The British were not like those who had come before. No. They were not like
I have to check if I'm recording because
their Shah, who looted and simply left. Nor were they like the Huns, who, while shedding Gupta blood, became Indian themselves. Yes, the British were different, for they saw India as an inexhaustible gold mine whose resources were to be forever extracted. By the time India won its independence,
I also thought, like, why Britain even invaded India, and now I see that it's because of the resources it had, yeah, because of profit that Britain could make of it.
In 1947, its native institutions had been demolished, its economy deindustrialized, its trade network severed, and its people more deeply divided by caste and creed.
You know, the first time I've heard about caste system, and I've heard that it was established by British people, not by Indian. I was so surprised, like I thought it existed because of Indians, but
in just 200 years of colonial rule, the India that once inspired the world was unmade. The halcyon days of India are over. She has been drained of all the wealth she once possessed, and her energies have been cramped by a sordid system of misrule. The deliberate bleeding of India by the British was so extreme that famed American scholar Will Durant referred to it as the greatest crime in all of history.
True,
So let's
it's
pull back the
greatest
curtain
crime.
and see what India was like before colonialism. In the 19th century, the American J.T. Sunderland wrote about the India that the British found when they arrived. India was a far greater industrial and manufacturing nation than any in Europe or Asia. Her textile goods were famous all over the civilized world. So was her exquisite jewelry and her precious stones.
Yeah,
So was her
textile,
pottery,
jewelry.
her porcelains and ceramics. So were her fine works in metal, iron, steel, silver, and gold. She had great architecture, equal in beauty to
Yeah,
any
the
in the world.
architecture is
She
still
had great
popular and
merchants,
famous
businessmen,
all over the
bankers,
world.
and
Indian
financiers.
architecture.
She was not only a great shipbuilding nation, but had commerce and trade which extended to all civilized countries. That may seem like heavy-handed praise, but the record does
That's
show
why
that
it
pre-colonial
has the
India was
high
a dominant
economy.
manufacturing economy. Let's take a closer look at the textile, shipbuilding, and metalworking industries.
Okay.
India was a textile superpower for most of its long history. There were many textile centers in the subcontinent. Coastal Andhra was a block printing hub, for example, while Gujarat and Bengal were known for their high-end woven products. There was global demand for these items. In fact, India enjoyed a mind-blowing 25% share of the global textile trade by the mid-18th century. This thriving textile trade had knock-on effects for the entire economy. For example, the popularity of
economy
Indian
was so
textiles
good
led
at
to the
that
creation
time,
of stable
of India.
international distribution networks. By piggybacking on these networks, other Indian artisans could sell their goods worldwide at a reduced cost. As a result, many different industries flourished alongside the Indian textile industry.
Flourish.
We know that international trade was conducted primarily along maritime routes, and so the Indian shipbuilding industry had developed into a behemoth too. A significant number of Indian ports were engaged in the shipbuilding industry. Dhaka, Mausalapatnam, Surat, Calicut, Quilon, and many, many others. Entire rural communities were involved in the production and processing of materials used to construct ships. Quality was paramount.
You know, they have a great access to sea, so no wonder that there are so many ports there. There were so many ports there, and they had profit of
Consider
it.
the Bengali merchant fleet in the
course.
early 17th century. The fleet consisted of nearly 5,000 ships, each capable of carrying up to 500 tons of goods. These ships were constructed in Bengali ports by native artisans who had the skills to craft elaborate wood, iron, and brass fittings.
There were so
According
many
to one British
skillful
maritime
people, I'm
observer,
sure,
Indian
that
vessels
time.
combine elegance and utility and are models of fine workmanship. Merchant contracts indicate that Bengali ships were much more durable than English ships. Bengali ships had an average
Feels
life
like Britain was just jealous of India at that time. Like, we should invade it, we should colonize it because India is doing better than us.
span exceeding 20 years, while English ships were not known to last more than 12. Quite a difference. India was a longtime pioneer in the global steel industry. As early as the 6th century CE, crucible-formed steel, which came to be known as woots or Damascus steel in the West, was being produced for export by Indian blacksmiths, particularly along
So
the
India
Malabar
had a
coast
lot
and in
of
the Deccan.
exports.
Arab and European officers regularly imported blades
And
from India.
earning from
While these
it.
blades were purchased as wartime implements, they were so robust and beautifully crafted that they also served as a mark of high status in times of peace. Though we've barely scratched the surface, it should already be clear that India was a manufacturing juggernaut, a thriving exporter of high-quality goods to markets throughout the world. How did the British manage to unmake
Yeah, it
all
was
of that?
flourished
The
that
fundamental
time.
principle of the British has been to make the whole Indian nation subservient to the interests and benefits of themselves. And so, once the British took power, they changed the entire dynamic of the Indian economy to suit their own interests. The first step,
It's sad.
dismantling all native industry. To start, they established a legal monopoly over Indian textile
Monopoly
goods
is
and
bad.
cut off the export market, which immediately disrupted long-standing trade links. Having now made themselves the exclusive buyers of Indian textiles, the British then changed the way that they paid for those goods. Instead of using foreign currency, they paid using the tax revenues extracted from India. The Indian economy stagnated and prices collapsed. Skilled artisans,
time
who once
for
fueled the
India.
vibrant Indian economic engine, were now significantly poorer and more restricted than ever before. And it didn't stop there. Soon enough, British manufacturers lobbied their government to completely eliminate the competition from the Indian textile industry. See, despite the restrictions imposed on Indian industry, British manufacturers were still finding it difficult to compete with Indian products. Company soldiers
Like, no matter what restriction they were setting here, they couldn't compete with the Indian
sent to
manufacturing
smash
industry.
Indian looms. According to several different accounts, they even went around breaking the thumbs of weavers so that they could no longer ply their trade.
So they wanted just to
But that's not all. To ensure that the Indian textile industry could not recover,
They just wanted to destroy everything, so have no competition, because otherwise they anyway had competition with the
adapt,
Indians.
or
Wow.
innovate itself back into relevancy, the British imposed an absurdly harsh 80% tariff. This had an immediate catch-22 trap effect. Exporting goods from India to the UK was now economically unviable. But remember, Indians were restricted from selling to anyone else. Similar restrictions
Indians couldn't sell to anyone else, to any other countries. They had such restrictions, such huge like taxes and everything. It made like the life of Indians like really impossible. All this earning process for them impossible. They were like stuck in that.
were imposed on nearly every branch of manufacturing in India. India was reduced to being a mere exporter of raw materials, like cotton and metal ore, so that the British could sell finished products back to Indians at a premium. We conquered India as an outlet for the goods of Britain. I'm not such a hypocrite to say that we hold India for the Indians. The colonial deindustrialization process was so complete that by 1947, only 0.7% of India was employed in any form of manufacturing. But skilled workers had to go somewhere, do something. The British monopoly on industrial production drove Indian artisans, merchants, builders, and others into agriculture en masse. In the words of Dr. Charles Hall, India's population has been thrown back upon the soil because Britain's discriminating duties have ruined every branch of native manufacture. Rural wages cratered to historical lows, and in fact, the land itself could not sustain the influx of newly disenfranchised workers. Poor seasonal harvests and droughts gave way to catastrophic famines and mass poverty. With most Indians now converted into peasant cultivators, the British sought to exploit them further. They began to tax cultivators as the primary revenue source for the administration. Taxes were extreme, pegged at 50 to 80% of gross income, and calculated before the harvest. The result?
50 and
Indian
80%.
cultivators often owed more in taxes than they earned as income. The British knew how harsh this really was. They openly conceded that they were imposing the highest tax rates in the world, and that
Highest
taxes were more than
tax
3
rates in
times
the
higher than
world.
they had ever been under Indian rulers.
They were admitting it.
To add insult to injury, the British even bragged about it in Parliament. The Indians have been taxed to the utmost limit. Every province has been made a field for higher exaction, and it has always been our boast how greatly we have raised the revenue above that which the native rulers were able to extort. Colonial taxes were so burdensome that 2/3 of the population in directly ruled British areas fled to the hinterlands, where native Indian lords could at least minimally protect them from financial depredation. The millions who stayed behind could hardly afford to pay taxes, and the situation was worsened by the fact that the British did not negotiate tax payments. Horrors were perpetrated under the guise of sinless mathematical neutrality. Tax defaulters were confined in cages and exposed to the burning sun. Fathers sold their children to meet the rising rates. Vulnerable peasants were physically tortured to pay up, and when they didn't have the means to pay, the British confiscated their farmland for themselves. Tens of millions of landless peasants were created for the first time in Indian history. By the end of the 19th century, India was Britain's largest source of revenue by far, its largest purchaser of exports,
Now I wonder like why other countries didn't help India at that time.
and a source of highly paid employment for both British civil servants and soldiers, and they were all paid for by Indian taxes. Many British officials freely acknowledged the exploitative nature of the colonial enterprise. In fact, a Prime Minister of the UK, the Marquess of Salisbury, himself admitted, "As India is to be bled of money, the lancet should be directed to those parts where the blood is congested." And just like that, India and its people were bled dry. The fundamental issue of British overlordship was the fact that the British had no intention to become one with the land or to rule it as their own. The British saw India as innately and eternally foreign, and this justified their creation and maintenance of what scholars have referred to as an extractive colony.
Just
For comparison's
colonies for
sake,
research.
consider the Turkic peoples who invaded India and eventually formed the Delhi Sultanate and the Mughal Empire. Look, the Mughals were no heroes. They imposed unequal taxes, engaged in religious
Yeah, they're
discrimination,
also bad.
plundered local treasuries, visited great violence upon their enemies, and exhibited a Persianized racial arrogance. But one thing is clear: India's wealth was preserved at a foundational level. After nearly
Why?
2 centuries of Mughal rule, India was still a dominant economic power, responsible for
How?
27% of global trade. There's a simple reason for that. See, the Mughals had a foreign place of origin, Fergana, but they did not repatriate India's resources to their original homeland. India may not have been Fergana, but it had become their new home, and so their loyalties and energies were owed solely to India. Meanwhile, the British ruled India as disconnected tyrants. The bulk of the revenue from India wasn't reinvested in India. No. It was extracted.
Now I also think like Britain was and is so far, like geographically so far from India. Like why British people even wanted to colonize it? I mean, why not colonize some lands near Britain?
And repatriated to their distant, foggy homeland. How much?
It
Modern
wasn't so
economists have
resourceful.
estimated that the total amount of wealth that the British extracted from India is in the ballpark of $43 trillion.
I cannot
Yes,
even imagine this
$43
number.
trillion.
It's a
When
lot.
taxes are not
It's a
spent
lot.
in the country from which they are raised, they constitute an absolute loss and extinction of the whole amount withdrawn from the tax country. The money might as well be thrown into the sea. Such is the nature of the tribute we have
And
so long exacted from India.
Why Britain even needed so much money and so much resources from India? Like, Britain is such a small land, it's such a small country, and always was. Like, why it even needed so much money?
Apologists for
For
colonial
what?
rule often point to the railways as some sort of extravagant counter to the argument of extraction and divestment. But as modern scholars have pointed out, the railways serve as evidence for how exploitative and inefficient British investment in India really was. First, there's the bold assumption that Indians would not have built railways, like the Japanese or others, either by importing the technology or by developing their own. India had been far too advanced and cutting edge of civilization to not keep up had it been given the opportunity to do so. When the British came to India, the country was the leader of Asiatic civilization.
Yeah, it was
Japan
so
was
civilized.
nowhere. Now, in 50 years, Japan has revolutionized her
progressive.
history with the aid of modern arts of progress, and India, burdened by 150 years of English rule, is condemned to tutelage.
It's
But
a
let's
lot.
ignore that for now.
It's a lot.
Initially, the Indian railways were positioned as a grand investment scheme for British shareholders. The government guaranteed substantial returns of at least 5% per year. And when the revenues were not enough to pay out these returns, Indian taxpayers covered all the losses. Because of these taxpayer-backed guarantees, construction of the railways was extremely inefficient. Here's a fun stat. Every mile of Indian rail cost £18,000 to construct, as compared to £2,000 for the same mile
Why?
built in the United States. All the elements of railway
Because of the
construction,
taxes?
steel, wagons, gears, engines,
Oh,
and
no.
more, were produced by British manufacturers. Indians weren't even given an opportunity to produce their own manufactured
produced
alternatives
in
because the
Britain
British
so
government
far
imposed
they
restrictions
had
that
to-
prevented Indians from competing. Worse still, the essential purpose of the railways was to assist the British enterprise in the exploitation of the natural
They had to
resources
deliver
of India.
all of it
in
to
fact,
India.
the railways made it possible for the British to export enormous amounts of grain and other agricultural products, which sparked and exacerbated famines. Over the course of British rule in India, and
So that's why British people were making these railways and were intended to make it to get more resources from
estimated
India.
35 million preventable
It was
deaths were
just
caused by
easier this
famines.
way.
That's millions more than those killed under Stalin or Mao,
Famines.
and that's 5 times more than the Holocaust.
Oh, it's a hunger.
The British were directly responsible for this. They mass exported Indian foodstuffs to Britain and other countries in Europe,
When it's
even during
compared to
drought
Holocaust,
periods. Food in India
Crazy.
became too expensive for peasants to afford.
food too
According to
expensive
Dr. Charles
for
Hall,
people to afford.
India starves so that its annual tax revenue to England may not be diminished by $1. There is plenty of grain in India. The trouble is that the people have been ground down till they are too poor to buy it. The British had no interest in
sad.
provisioning for Indian lives. Famine non-intervention
didn't care
was
about lives
official
of
government
people.
policy. How ironic, given that heavy-handed British intervention and market manipulation is what sparked the famines in the first place. And when good people, Indians and foreigners, worked together to help famine-affected peasants, the British government made efforts to stop them. They were furious that the government's own failures were being highlighted. Don't believe me? Listen to this British officer.
So the government these people even trying to help peasants, and then British government was stopping them from it.
In his own
to
words,
prevent people from
scores
hunger.
of corpses were tumbled into old wells because the deaths were too numerous for the relatives to perform funeral rites. Mothers sold their children for a single meal. Husbands flung their wives into ponds to escape the torment of seeing them perish from hunger. But amid these scenes of death,
I
the
feel so
British
sorry
government
for
in
people
India
who
was
lived at
unmoved.
that time.
Newspapers were persuaded into silence. Strict orders were given to civilians. Do not acknowledge that civilians are dying of hunger. And if you think that Indians would have done a worse job, consider this. There hasn't been a single large-scale Indian famine in the 70-plus years since British rule ended. Not one. Independent India has its flaws, but it has been overwhelmingly better at
glad
providing
that
for the care,
The
safety, and
situation
prosperity
is
of its
better
own
in
people.
India now.
And now you know.
Oh. Honestly, it was a hard video to watch, especially at the end. Okay, wait. I knew some things from these historical facts, but I didn't know about Mongol invasion for so many years, and at the end, I didn't know such details. I thought that peasants and like people were just living fine, even when Britain colonized India. I thought that they could survive, but then when they compared like death with the Holocaust time, it's just crazy how many people were starving and died from hunger, and I don't know, some words, they were just terrible. When the narrator like was saying that mothers were selling children for just a meal, and I don't want to discuss it anymore. But yeah, I think I told you everything during the video. I tried at least, and I think this video will be already so long. And well, I just want you to tell me, have you studied this history in these details at schools in India, like from this perspective, or from another one, like how it was, or how long, like were you studying it? Yeah, because it's the history of your country, and it's terrible, to be honest. And I just want to read some comments now. So yeah, the recording sect. The sad part is that most of the British people don't want to accept this fact, and I think it's a wrong opinion, because now, like, all of the people that were ruling at that time, that lived at that time in Britain, they no longer exist, they don't live anymore, so all of them died, and current generation, they just have nothing to do with those events, with those historical blood events. They have nothing to do with it. So people, like British people, even now, they didn't do anything to Indian people, so they don't have to accept this history. But yeah, I think they have to accept it as their past, the past of their country. This makes me truly sad. Yeah, my nana was born in British soldier who met her mother in Catholic. Yeah, only like your grandparents maybe remember that time, but other people know. This reminds me of a quote I read a little while ago. Studying history will sometimes disturb you, upset you, make you furious, but it always make you feel proud and happy. You probably aren't studying history. So yeah, I think history mostly is like bloody and terrifying and terrible. That's why I don't like history, but I want to react on this video. I think it's an important topic, a vital one for India. So I wanted to make my knowledge a little bit wider on this topic, and I didn't know such details. So hard video to watch, not as funny as the previous one I reacted to, where the guy was just making jokes about these events. But yeah, it's nice to see the same events from different perspectives. So thank you guys for watching till the end. I hope you like this video. So don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and see you in my next videos. Bye bye.